Hi, my name is Courtney. I am 32 years old and I'm a recovering heroin addict. I have been clean for 10 months and I'm here to talk about my addiction today.
Hey, thank you so much for being here with us. I would like to ask you a few questions if that's okay with you.
Of course.
Okay. So, the first question we have is what age were you when you first tried heroin and what interested you in trying it?
Okay, so I've been doing heroin. I did heroin for a little over 10 years. So I believe I was about 21 or 22 years old when I first tried heroin. And heroin was not my first stop. So I had already dabbled with other drugs. So I don't clearly remember my first, like the first time I ever used, which was like, whatever. But, so yeah, so I was about 21 or 22 and all my friends had used heroin. So I think it was just, it was just there and I tried it. And
Just curious.
Yeah.
So, Courtney, when you first tried heroin, would you say that you were immediately hooked? Or how did that come about?
Yeah, I think so. Because I was hanging out around with people that only used heroin. And so it was just always available. And yeah, I think especially after the first 3 days, once you start doing it for 3 days, you're instantly hooked.
Right. And so, did you start out smoking it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how soon after that did you start injecting?
I would say probably like 3 or 4 months.
Okay, so
Yeah.
pretty soon.
Yeah.
So, was it that by smoking you weren't getting as much of a high anymore and you needed to go to the next step?
I think with me, my body's super sensitive, so I would throw up a lot with smoking. Like I hated the taste, the smell, it was all just so gross to me, and so I needed to find another way.
Right.
And that
Oh,
was the easier, softer way at the time.
right. Did somebody help you inject the first time?
Yes.
Or you did it? Okay.
Yeah.
What was the lowest point that you experienced while you were using?
I would say the lowest point for me would be when this was after I had my daughter. I had my daughter in June 2015, and I left her when she was 6 weeks old because I had been on methadone per like my pregnancy, like the doctors made me be on it. And then the rehab I was at made me get off of it really fast. When the doctors advised me it would take a year or two to get off, and I got off it within 6 weeks, less than 6 weeks. And so I was very sick, and I left my daughter with my mother, and I went on like a run for 3.5 years. And I think those 3.5 years were my lowest point because like with all my heart, all I wanted was my child. And that was the love of my life. That was everything to me. But the drugs had such a big hold on me that I couldn't stop. I stayed out there for 3.5 years, because I just couldn't stop.
Right. Okay.
I think like just to elaborate on that one a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
is on that question was that my lowest point was when I was living in a really nice apartment in Laguna Niguel, had everything materialistically, but inside I was dying, But there was other times in my addiction where I was literally like living on the streets or, just hopping from hotel to hotel or just doing like degrading things, to get drugs. Those weren't my lowest points. It was like just the point of just utter like depression and just like this yearning to want to stay clean and not being able to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's important for a lot of people to know. It's not just about, not having a place to live or not having family, not having any of this. It's not having yourself and your soul, and I really think at that point in my life I was soulless.
Totally.
So I started using I'll say the first time I picked up anything was I was 15 and I smoked weed for the first time. And it was a half day at school, and so like a bunch of our friends, we were hanging out with older friends, and they were all going to smoke weed. So I went over with them and I smoked weed, and it was horrible. I hated it. I literally like blacked out. I threw up, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went home and I was walking down my street, and I was literally like, we live in a cul-de-sac, and I was like 4 houses away from my mom's house, and my mom was in the driveway. And from that far away, she's like, "You're stoned." And so I was super grounded by then.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't try anything again for a while. And then I think I was around 16 or 17, and I started drinking. On the weekends, I would spend the night at friends' houses, that my mom thought were like good, good friends, but their parents allowed us to drink. So we would have parties, and I would drink with them. And then, like I said earlier, my body's super sensitive to stuff. So like when I would drink, I would throw up every time, and I would get a hangover. Like there were 3 days, it was horrible. So I got introduced to like muscle relaxers, and they were like little pills. And so I would take those when I was drinking. Then I would only have to drink like 2 beers, and then I would like be fine, and I wouldn't be sick the next day, but then I wouldn't remember a couple days either.
Mm-hmm.
So then that led, it went from weed to drinking to pills, and as I said, my mom was super strict in high school, so I didn't really dabble in much more than that. But I had a boyfriend in high school who was smoking crack, but at the time I didn't know what that was. People would be, "Oh, your boyfriend's a crackhead." Okay, whatever. Like, I didn't know what that meant. And then I was 18 years old, and I got kicked out of my mom's house for my drinking and pills and everything. And I moved in with my grandparents, and one night I was with one of my friends that smoked crack with my boyfriend. I found out that was a real thing, smoking crack. And I went with her, and I was in the back seat of the car, and I was underneath a sweatshirt, and we pretended like I was just some drunk girl. And they bought their crack, and like I peeked out and I watched them smoke crack, and I was like, "Whoa, this is like real, like what the heck?" And I watched them just like morph into these completely different people, and I was just like, "Whoa, this is weird," And then I realized that my boyfriend, like, if I didn't do that with him, like, because we weren't hanging out that much anymore and all this stuff, and so I was like, I missed him. And so I started doing coke with him, and we started hanging out every day then, and I had my boyfriend back, and it would just like went from there. And I, evolved from coke to, meth, and then from meth to heroin. But, yeah, all I wanted was to hang out with my boyfriend. So I found a way to do that, but it led me to many years of drug use, which I didn't think at the time it would, I didn't think, oh, I'm going to be a drug addict like my boyfriend, but it just happened that way. So then I got arrested for the first time at 18 years old for under the influence, and in Thousand Oaks area, Thousand Oaks Newbury Parks. I mean, they really like to give that charge out, So I like kept getting under the influence, and just kept going to jail, and like this was over 10 years ago. So at that time we would stay in jail for longer, So I had like sometimes periods of time when I was clean for 6 months or 7 months, but I didn't get any rehabilitation in there. So it was just, I was just right back out with my friends, just waiting to get out and go do whatever with them. And, yeah, but then once I started doing heroin, it was, when I was using meth and coke, I was able to kind of keep a job, like kind of, it wasn't like anything too serious of a job, but then I started doing heroin, and I just couldn't keep a job. I would show up, for a little while, but then I would be sick one day, so I couldn't go to work. So, so I like hopped around from job to job, but then eventually I was essentially homeless, I was like just trying to get money, stealing from stores, like clothes or whatever, and returning them, getting gift cards, whatever, just to like get a hotel room for that night, And I did that with one of my best friends. And we did that for a long time, like from the Valley to Santa Barbara. We were essentially homeless, just using guys to get hotel rooms or whatever, and or a place to stay. And eventually we landed in Santa Barbara, and we lived with this older man who just, had a crush on both of us, basically. But he took care of us. He had a house, and he paid for our drugs. He paid for the house, whatever. And, but her and I just like, we didn't have anything to lose, it was just her and I out there on the street. And one night, I mean, she overdosed countless times, many, many, many times. And this one night, and she started getting like a little bit paranoid schizophrenia from just drug induced, when she was sober, she was completely normal. But, this one night we were at a hotel with just one of our friends, and she got really paranoid and she left, you know. And before that, I had always chased her down, chased her, you know, and like always made sure she was okay. I always brought her to the hospital when she overdosed. I would never leave her, you know. And this one night she ran away, and I didn't chase after her. I was just like done, you know. I was like, oh, there's nothing I can do, you know. I felt so helpless. I didn't know where to look for her to begin with, you know. And then I left, and I went to Ventura, and I got a phone call the next morning that they had found her overdosed in the bathroom in Santa Barbara. And, you know, I just like, I was at somebody's house, and there was a bunch of people around, and I couldn't stop crying, and I felt so guilty because I didn't go chase after her that night, you know. Even though I didn't know where to look, I just felt like I could have just looked somewhere, you know. But I didn't chase after her, and the next couple days were kind of a blur, but I found out I was pregnant within those next couple days. Found out I was pregnant. I went to her funeral with my mom. That was the only way I could go, was with my mom, you know, because her parents knew that we used together. So I went to her funeral with my mom, and then I went back to Ventura, and I was at 7-Eleven, and it was raining, and I couldn't be around anybody at the time because I was like so just depressed, you know, and just like needed my friend back. And I went behind the 7-Eleven, and I just got on my knees and I prayed. I was like, God, I'm pregnant. I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I need my best friend back. I know it's not going to happen though, you know. And I was just like, I just need help. And I just went about my business, and the next morning I got arrested for like not showing up for court in Santa Barbara. And I was just like, whoa, you know, like if I was having trouble believing in God at that time, I was like, I didn't have trouble anymore. You know, it was like so prevalent. I was like, okay. And so, you know, I went to jail, and they put me on methadone because I was pregnant. And it was like, it was really overwhelming, you know, because I was like, okay, I'm pregnant, and like I'm on heroin, you know, and they were like, okay, you have to be on methadone. And I'm just like sitting there. I'm like, I don't want to put a child through this, you know, being on methadone. Like, I heard all the horror stories, and I was like, this is going to be horrible. And so I was like, I had already been on it for a couple days, and one of the cops had taken me to this was in Santa Barbara, taken me to the methadone clinic. And they were like, because I was in Ventura and I got moved to Santa Barbara. And I was in there like they were trying to sign me up. And I was like, you know what? No, I don't want to be on this. I'm not going to put my daughter through this. I know how horrible it is to come off this stuff. Like, I'm not doing this. And so I was like, please take me back to the jail, to the officer. And then I went to the car, and the officer came to my door, and he had like tears in his eyes. And he's like, you know, I can't tell you medically what to do. He's like, but I just don't want to see you lose your child. And I'm like, what's like, wow. I'm only like, you know, like 9 weeks pregnant. Like, I'm not like showing or anything. Like, how does he have this emotional connection with my child? You know, it was like, I feel like he was an angel, you know, like a messenger from God. And he's like, I really shouldn't even be talking to you right now about this, you know. And he had the door open, you know, he was just sitting there talking to me, crying. And he's like, I really think you need to go back in there and take the methadone, you know, just listen to what the doctor said. So I did, and I thought about that later, like when I was leaving a couple months, I was in the jail for a couple months, I was leaving, and I shook his hand, I think. I would just sit there and think about that. I would think about that officer, and I'm like, why did he stop and talk to me? Like, you know, what was the point, you know? But then I like look back on it, and it obviously was like, you know, an angel, you know, or like my higher power, like sending me a message, like, this is going to be okay, you know, because I didn't think she would be okay, you know, with all the meth and heroin I was on. Like, how could a child be okay, you know? And so, so I went through with it, and, you know, I had a perfectly healthy baby. Like, she was so healthy. It was amazing. And then, so I was on the methadone my whole pregnancy. And then I was out of rehab. They took me from jail to the rehab, you know. So I spent my whole pregnancy like pretty healthy, you know. It was only the first 8 weeks that I was using, you know. So the doctor said that wouldn't have any effect on her. And so I was in the rehab with her. I was on the methadone. I would walk to the methadone clinic every morning, and I would put one headphone on her and one headphone on me, and like I just had this just beautiful connection with her. She was all I ever wanted. You know, I was just like so excited to see her. I would talk to her every night in my stomach. And then she came out of me. That sounded weird.
We get it.
I had her.
She was born.
Yeah, she was born. No, she was born addicted to methadone, you know. And I remember being in the hospital room, and I thought she was fine. You know, she seemed like a normal baby to me. And then the doctors came in, and you know, they took her to the NICU, to the what is it, neonatal intensive care unit?
Mhm.
Yeah. I think everybody knows what NICU means. Okay, so they took her to the NICU, and that was just like devastating. I was like, oh my God, what did I do to her? You know, and I was just so devastated. And then she was in there, and I went back to the rehab, you know, after they let me out of the hospital, and I would walk like 2 miles to the hospital every single day, there and back, you know. Sometimes I would get a ride, but, you know, from the staff. But normally I would walk like 2 miles there and 2 miles back just to sit there and hold her for 8 hours. You know, it was like, that was my joy, my pride. And and she did amazing. You know, the doctors said that they'd never seen a baby be healthier, you know, like get off the methadone any healthier than her. So she was off it 1 month from the day she was born. So July 15th, she was off of it. And the rehab was forcing me to get off the methadone. They're like, you need to be off. You're not pregnant anymore. You can't be on it anymore. So I was going down like 2 milligrams a day, and I was just so sick, like so horrible. And I couldn't sleep. I was irritable. And then I had my daughter with me, and she could feel everything that I was feeling, you know, because you have that bond with your child and you're so close to them, holding them. And she was crying a lot, and she was just like irritable as well. And so my mom was like, okay, I think it's time that I take her for a week, you know, and let you settle down and come off the methadone. So she did that. And a week later, I went to my mom's to go pick her up and go to court or something. And I was just so sick. I had stopped going to methadone completely. I was just so sick. I gave up, you know. And one of my ex-boyfriends called me or texted me, you know, and he's like, oh, I'm in town, blah, blah, blah. And so I just left with him. And that was 3.5 years, you know, that I stayed out and stayed away from my child. And those 3.5 years, it was an abusive, physically, mentally, emotionally relationship. You know, it was horrible. And after the first year, he stopped like physically abusing me, and it was just emotionally and mentally, which was not okay either. Like none of those choices are okay, you know. And so, but I just became so like, I used to be very confident, you know, and then this relationship made me like so, you know, like a little, like I went back into my shell, you know, and I still feel it today, you know, but so I was just like afraid of everything. He would tell me that my mother hates me, my daughter hates me, like nothing's ever, you know, and it was my choice to stay in this relationship, you know. I'm not the victim totally, but I finally after 3.5 years, I was at home, and I had like a really bad fever. Like it was like only 100, well not only, but it was like 102. And he said, okay, I'm going to go to the store and get you some cereal and milk and some juice, and I'll be right back. And this was like 12:30 at night. And this was day 1 of my fever. And then he left, and he didn't come back for 3 days. And I was at home, you know, and I would take Motrin, you know, and my fever would go to like, it was like up to 104. It would go to like 102, you know, and then after 8 hours, the Motrin would wear off, shoot right back up. I could barely walk. I was just so sick. And he finally comes home 3 days later. He's like, well, you really are sick. I'm like, well, yeah. I'm pretty sure I was sick when you left. No, but so he's like, we need to get you to the hospital. So I go to the hospital, and there I was just in my jaw locked up, my neck locked up. So I couldn't really talk. I was just screaming, you know, in pain, in agony. And they ended up keeping me for 6 weeks because I got an infection in my heart valve from heroin. And that was like, I believe I had like a major spiritual awakening when I was in the hospital, because I was like, okay, I'm sitting here, like the doctors were like, you're lucky to be alive right now, you know, because you have like, I had sepsis through my whole body because, you know, your blood goes through your heart. So my heart was infected, so that my whole blood was infected. And they were telling me like, you're so lucky to be alive. Like you can't do this to yourself anymore, you know? And so I was like, oh, I don't want to be here. Like 6 weeks in the hospital. Are you kidding? Like that's so boring. But so I was in a hospital in Orange County. One of my sisters came and picked me up there and brought me to Ventura. I ended up in the hospital in Ventura County. And my mom brought my daughter to see me for like the first time, essentially, you know. I had seen her one other time, but it was the first time, and I was like, wow, like I didn't know to think like, okay, wait, am I gonna die or something? Like, is that why you're bringing her, or or do you really just have that much faith in me that that it's gonna happen this time? So she brought her to see me, and I think that just changed my whole perspective on life. I was like, I was brought back to when I was pregnant and like thinking, oh, this is all I wanted, just wanted her. And so I did like a lot of soul searching in the hospital because I had nothing else to do really. I had nothing but time. And so I had amazing nurses who would bring me like reading material, and they would take me shopping, take me to get my nails done, just help me to like feel better about myself. I ended up blocking the guy that I was with, the abusive one, from coming to see me, from calling me, from everything, because I was just so ready to change my life. And so after I got out of the hospital, I went to sober living, and I've been there for 10 months now. And I have a job today. I have my daughter in my life. I have my family in my life, and it's possible to come back from heroin addiction.
Yeah. Yay. Very good.